almost worked without the mic, didn't it? Yeah, we're just waiting for red. Oh, red means live. Thanks everybody for coming out tonight. Looks like we've divided into two camps, EMS on one side and everybody else on the other side. Okay. First, I'd like to introduce ourselves. Save Our Medevac Services Society, who is here tonight to do this information session, is a group of physicians and healthcare advocates. We're deeply concerned that healthcare delivery has been completely overlooked in the debate over the Edmonton City Centre Airport. Our reason, depth, and exclusive reason for coming here tonight is to inform you about the health implications of the pending transfer of Medevacs to the Edmonton International Airport this week, March 15th, and to compel the provincial government to keep Medevacs flying into Edmonton City Centre Airport until such time as an option providing the same timely access to tertiary care is in place. Our board is comprised of the following 5 individuals. Oscar, the guy in pajamas initially, that would be me. Next to him is Dr. Liam McGowan, who's from Grand Prairie. He's an anesthetist and zone director of anesthesia for Northern Alberta, which encompasses everything north of Edmonton, and until just recently was also the medical director of STARS there in Grand Prairie as well. Next to him is Dr. John O'Connor. He's a family doctor in Fort McMurray and Fort McKay, as well as a hospitalist in Fort McMurray. Dr. O'Connor also did telehealth for Janvier and worked as a medical examiner for many years. He's often in the spotlight championing healthcare for his patients. Next is Bruce McLaughlin, who joins us tonight. He's at the end of the table, is missing in action. He'll be back. He's a former Minister of Health in the Northwest Territories with loads of experience arranging transfers to Edmonton at huge expense. We must believe him when he says patients are coming for very specialized care and not routine x-rays. Finally, rounding out the board is Adrienne Bennett. She's a Medevac captain with Noralta, currently on maternity leave and is based on Fort McMurray. I worked as a family doctor in Edmonton, as well as I work as a hospitalist in orthopedics at the Royal Alexandra Hospital. A hospitalist is somebody who doesn't do the carpentry in orthopedics, but rather manages some of the medical issues that arise during their stay in that hotel. Additionally, I founded Angel Flight Alberta, which is a charitable organization that assists people predominantly from rural Alberta in flying to medical appointments for free. These are not the critical patients that you guys would necessarily be involved with, but rather folks who are traveling for non-urgent medical care, what I call the walking wounded. Now, my connection to the North in this particular issue is both professional as well as personal. I've worked in rural communities in Manitoba as well as in Alberta, so I appreciate the anxiety physicians might have associated with providing medical services with limited resources. I also appreciate how expansive our provinces and territories are and how critical air transportation is to expedite bringing patients to definitive care when they're in desperate need. My personal connection relates to having relatives and Angel Flight patients who live in these communities. I have family living in Berwyn, Eaglesham, Spirit River, Fairview, as well as here in Lloydminster. And I don't see you tonight. I'm a little disappointed. I've seen through their medical experiences how the distance takes its toll, whether it's routine follow-up care for a stable condition, urgent investigations for something that has not yet been diagnosed, or emergent treatment for a life-threatening condition. I know that being so far away from specialty care complicates matters. There's added cost for that vulnerable patient by way of travel costs, loss of income due to time away from work, as well as just the emotional cost. Being ill is emotionally hard on you at the best of times, without issues of coordinating childcare, time off work, and traveling in inclement weather. Now, just to be clear about what the impending changes to Medevacs actually mean, we have to understand how our system works. Hospitals provide different levels of care. Vermilion Healthcare Center is a primary care facility. It has lab and x-ray, I believe. Lloydminster, Grand Prairie, and Peace River hospitals have the secondary hospitals with their CT scanners, MRIs, and slightly more specialty services. But you'll have to make the trip to Edmonton or Calgary with their tertiary care hospitals if you're needing things like functional MRIs or PET scans, perinatal care, specialized surgery like heart, vascular, trauma, prostate, or thoracic surgery, to name a few examples. Perhaps neonatal care or more extensive cancer care. Eventually, outlying centers will have the population base to justify having tertiary care close to home. But until then, let's not degrade the system we have and put a single patient at risk. So when you first know that you're not feeling well, you seek the advice of your family physician or perhaps an emergency room doc at your local hospital. Now, there are two scenarios for Canadians. The first might be if you live in a large urban center. Your point of entry into the system may be very close to a lot of very specialized services, whether you actually need them or not. The second scenario might be if you live in a remote rural setting. Here, you might actually be seen in a bare-bones nursing station and have been triaged by a nurse. Now, depending on your condition and your luck, you might be sent home with a prescription to have more homemade chicken soup or garlic, in my family, and just get some rest. In this case, it really doesn't matter that much whether you're in scenario 1 or 2, urban or rural. On the other hand, you might be very unlucky and be told you have acute coronary syndrome, the big one, and you need a coronary angiogram. Now, this is where the luck comes in. If you're living in a large urban center, you will likely have that service available almost immediately, and you'll be able to access that procedure within the targeted 90 minutes. That's an hour and a half. Unfortunately, there's no way a population or Alberta Health Services can realistically justify the expense of building, operating, and staffing such facilities in every rural community, hospital, or nursing station. That's where an efficient transportation service comes in. It's our air ambulance or air Medevac service that keeps our two-tiered medicine, that's urban and rural, not private and public, from being too discrepant. It minimizes the time it takes to get patients to that definitive care. They are our flying ground units with lights and sirens on, and they do a very efficient job. Here in Alberta, we can boast the best transfer times in all of Canada. Whether it is the cardiac patient needing that cath lab, this sci-fi setup behind me, there we go, thank you, run by an interventional cardiologist, whether it's the pregnant mother with premature labor needing a perinatologist and perhaps an operating room and a neonatal intensive care unit with all of their specialized equipment and manpower to run it. Next, thank you. The employee with an industrial accident or motor vehicle collision victim needing a trauma suite, not unlike this one. Thank you. Or the stroke patient or the pediatric emergency, they all use air Medevacs to access these specialized services. But we are poised to lose our ranking on March 15th this week and not drop by 1 or 2 notches. We're going from the very best to the very worst in Canada. So let's back up a little bit and run through an actual transfer. So when your local physician has found that you're in need of a higher level of care, he or she will contact a coordinator with Rapid North. This is, I guess, if you're an Alberta card bearer and you're coming into our system. I guess Saskatchewan's got a slightly different system, but you would call Rapid North. So they connect the local physician, the sending doc, with an accepting physician in Edmonton who will ultimately assume care of this patient. The coordinator then arranges the Medevac plane and air medical crew, with you subsequently being transferred to the Edmonton City Centre Airport. And this is the aircraft that you would be transferred in. They're very capable Beechcraft King Airs. And this is what you get to look at from a patient's perspective. That crew of paramedics will take you from the sending physician onto their plane to their waiting ambulance at the City Centre Airport and personally deliver you to the accepting physician at the Royal Alexandra or University or Stollery Children's Hospital. There are no middlemen. There's no first aid station, aka triage unit that they're talking about. There's no STARS transfer. You go straight into a warm waiting ambulance and 5 minutes later you're at the Royal Alexandra Hospital. Or if you're going to the University or the Stollery, it's 13 minutes. Now in total we have 12 of these aircraft and they are based in Lac La Biche, Slave Lake, Grand Prairie, Peace River, Fort McMurray, High Level, Fort Vermilion, and Edmonton. The air medical crews and ambulances are also at these bases, providing their own dedicated land transportation between aircraft and hospital, not Alberta Health Services equipment. To give you some idea of the number of patients flown, the Health Quality Council of Alberta report 2010 documented 3,059 Medevacs that year, with 1,779 being critical or time sensitive. So this is a group that provides policy to our provincial government, and the provincial government commissioned them to do that study. Now in 2012, there were an estimated 5,000 or 14 Medevacs a day. And this number is not going down. It's only going up with the population and economic activity of the North, both growing. So to give you a visual, here's a map showing the proximity of the two main tertiary hospitals relative to the Edmonton City Centre Airport. Now, the next picture, you're going to see the planned new Medevac destinations. And we've had to go up to the International Space Station to actually get that picture so that you could get it in there, because it's considerably further away. So we could be going from that 5-minute short ride in the truck to 40 minutes if you're coming from the International. Even with the skip of snow on the ground, I know that I'd be able to push that gurney from the runway at the Edmonton City Centre Airport the 1,400 meters to the front door of the Royal Alexandra Hospital before the plane, having just landed at the International, could even taxi to the new first aid station. Some of the Medevac providers have documented 12-minute taxi times just to get off the runway, down the taxiways to that unit. So even though the City of Edmonton will allow Medevacs to keep landing into 2014 or longer, the Alberta government has decided Medevacs are going to be relocated to the Edmonton International Airport this week. And now you're going from a 5-minute to a 40-minute ride to the Alex, and from a 13-minute to a 35-minute to the university. The best in Canada to the worst. Here's the table documenting what relocation means for various northern communities, including yours. So your transfer times going from Lloydminster to the Royal Alexandra Hospital are going to go from 40 minutes to just about twice. An hour and 15 minutes. So by the time you're bundled up, everything's figured out, are you going to make that critical 90-minute window? So let's be clear what this all means. For that acute patient, let's start with the non-acute patient, the delay might only mean inconvenience or increased pain. But it's the critically ill patient that we're advocating for. Minutes, even seconds, can make the difference between them going back to their regular jobs with no disability or not. The reality is that even with the existing model, because we have populated the far reaches of this large province, we sometimes cannot get patients to the level of care that they actually need. But you can be sure that there will be increased suffering, complications, and death with relocation. And this is entirely preventable. Until a comparable alternative is available and implemented, the government needs to delay its decision to relocate Medevacs on the 15th of March. Now, you might have heard some measures to mitigate the risk of moving Medevacs to the International, but don't drink the Kool-Aid. So when the Alberta government tells you that a new triage unit at the Edmonton International Airport hangar will help, we need to ask how another assessment gets that patient to the care he or she needs without adding yet more time to the transfer process. Do you think that the sending doctor needs a nurse out at the airport to confirm that, yep, this patient's having a heart attack and really does need to get along to that angioplasty in the cath lab? Oh yeah, and it took an extra 20 minutes just to exchange equipment between the fixed wing air ambulance and the holding area as well. And when the Alberta government tells you that Villeneuve Airport could be an alternate landing site, we need to ask, do you have a first aid station there too? Do you have the runway improvements with precision approaches for bad weather? And has the surgeon now become a tertiary care hospital? Because that airport certainly is no closer than the Edmonton International Airport is to the Royal Alex or the University or the Stolleries. And I was kidding. The Sturgeon General Hospital is not a tertiary care hospital and likely has less at its disposal than you have here in Lloydminster. And when the Alberta government tells you that STARS can shuttle time-sensitive patients, we need to ask, even given ideal conditions, could they match the current transfer times? Plus, can they shuttle 7 to 8 patients a day, every day, 365 days a year, good weather and bad? Hospital helipads, I'm 99.99% certain, do not have instrument approaches. So when your ceilings are down, yeah, those birds might be able to fly in adverse conditions. They say that the new one is de-ice capable, but there's still no instrument approaches at the hospitals. So then we have to bring up mass casualties as well. STARS, as well as 2 fixed-wing air ambulances, were all in St. Paul recently with those kids that had somebody do donuts on top of in that school. So if everything was going to the International as planned later this week, who would have been at the airport to shuttle the 2 kids back to Edmonton that weren't on the big red bird? They would have had to be transferred by ground as the helicopter was tied up transporting that first victim. STARS isn't the solution, and Cam Heek, media spokesperson for STARS, and their actual pilots as well, will tell you they can't perform this. The Health Quality Council of Alberta report documented 206 cancelled flights because of inclement weather in 2010. Now, as much as I love STARS, and I think that they are an integral part of our delivery of transfers to patients who are in need, this mission is not in line with their ability or their mandate, which is short-range shock trauma rescue. So until the Alberta government is able to come up with a solution that maintains the transfer times that we currently enjoy, we need to stand together to demand that we keep Medevacs where they are. We need to preserve the efficiencies in the system and even work to improve on them before we lose a single patient. I'm not sure who your next speaker is. These guys didn't do the arm wrestle. I guess it'll be Keith. So to give you his insights and perspectives with some suggestions about what we can do, I'll hand the mic over to Keith Wilson. Keith is an Alberta lawyer whose law practice focuses on helping individuals and groups with disputes involving the provincial government. Keith has been a lawyer for over 18 years and has appeared before all levels of Alberta courts and numerous boards and commissions. Keith's efforts at helping change government laws and policies were recently recognized in 2011 when the Alberta Venture Magazine, or Venture Business Magazine, named him one of Alberta's 50 most influential people. Keith is legal counsel to the Save Our Medevac Services Society, and we're thrilled to have him champion this cause.
Thank you very much. What I've got up on the screen is a full-page ad that a group of doctors from across northern and rural Alberta paid to have published in the Edmonton Journal a week ago. They signed their names to it. At the time, they decided to go ahead with the ad. It was on very short notice, 3 hours actually. 36 doctors asked to have their names on. We're now at 90 as of a few hours ago. So 90 doctors from across northern and rural Alberta are very alarmed about something. And what they're alarmed about is their ability after March 15th to save patients that come to their emergency room that they currently can save today. The reason I was brought in on this was, I still remember the first meeting with Dr. McGowan and Dr. O'Connor and Dr. Paluski, and they were explaining to me what these changes would mean. And I said, well, if that's true, then somebody would die. And they looked at me and said, exactly, that's the point. In other words, time matters. They started to give me example after example of situations, whether it's someone having a massive heart attack or someone who's involved in a head-on collision out on Highway 16 and has to be flown in, having major trauma, whether it's a woman hemorrhaging during pregnancy. Time matters. And I just assumed that every hospital could do everything. So I admit that naivety. I suspect there's lots of other people that think that too. I thought everything they could do at the Royal Alec, they could do at the Sturgeon, they could do at the Westlock Hospital, they could do at Lloydminster, they can do in Grand Prairie. And the doctor said, oh, no, that's not how healthcare is delivered. So they educated me about how how many burn units are there in northern Alberta? One. And it's not in Lloydminster. It's in Edmonton. How many neonatal intensive care units are there in northern Alberta? One. There's a nurse in the front row here coaching me. And so our whole healthcare delivery system that they impressed upon me involves, the whole system's designed on speed. How many numbers do you have to phone on your phone when you witness a car accident on the highway or your loved one's having a heart attack or a seizure or a stroke? 3 digits, 911. Why do we do that? Speed, right? Speed. Why do we have lights and sirens on ambulances? Because they look really cool. No, it's because we need them to get to you quickly and back to the hospital quickly. So what, Dr. McGowan in particular, he spent so much of his career dealing with emergency medicine, emergency transfers, and Dr. Ibbotson in Grand Prairie as well, really impressed upon me that the whole system's designed on doing everything we can fast as much as we can, because there's going to be delays. The ambulance is going to get to the car wreck, but it may take half an hour for the firefighters to get the guy cut out. So anywhere we can save time, the whole system's designed on saving time. So here, right now, we have a fleet of 5 dedicated fixed-wing air ambulances. And I can also tell you, before I met these doctors, I didn't even know we had such a thing. I thought STARS saved everybody, right? And STARS does a great job, nothing against STARS. And then when they said that an air ambulance, I thought, like a fixed wing, I thought what they did was they took the stretcher and they laid it between the seats, right? And they had to explain to me, no, could we get this lawyer a picture, please? But I suspect there's other people who think this too, that don't know that the inside of these air ambulances, as the pictures show, are ambulances. Oxygen, IV pumps, monitors for the heart, and all that other stuff, right? That was all the paramedics I just asked. They're real live ambulances. And their whole mission is to get you to that specialized care as quickly as possible. So why did the doctors take out a full-page ad in the Edmonton Journal? It's because they've been watching the changes that are coming to the Medevac system this week. It's like watching a car accident for them in slow motion. And they have said to the government, wait a second, what you're about to do is going to double the transport time in that critical period. What's more important, the first 5 minutes or the last 5 minutes of someone's life from a medical point of view? They tell me it's the last 5 minutes. That's when you're more vulnerable, you're closer to death. And as I've sat and interviewed too many emergency room doctors in the last month, and they have impressed upon me that thin line between life and death. And I know the paramedics here have seen it, and the nurse as well. So that's what's going on. This is real. And what the doctors have said, and they say in this letter, that if the change goes ahead as planned, that there's so many gaps in the government's relocation plan that patients who would otherwise survive will not. Some who would otherwise survive and maybe make it to the cath lab, cardiac catheterization lab, and have the stent put in. That process takes about 15 minutes, correct? So once you're wheeled through the door and you're just on the edge of death, that very experienced cardiac specialist puts that stent in, you're good, put you up on a ward, and how long till they're out of the hospitalist? A day or 2 days. And they've back to normal life, back to hugging the kids, helping out, back to work. But if it's an extra 20 minutes, you might become what the doctors have explained to me as a cardiac cripple, or worse. Okay? So this is exceptionally serious. So why a lawyer? The doctors wanted to understand why this was happening. They wanted to understand who made these decisions. They wanted to understand who has responsibility to fix them. So that's why they brought me in. So let's just go through a few things real quick here. One of the things the doctors ran into was government say, oh, it's a City of Edmonton issue. And I said to them, they didn't really say that, did they? And they said, yeah, they did. I said, oh, so healthcare delivery is a City of Edmonton issue. Wow, that's breaking news. There must be a special clause in the Constitution I'm not aware of. In other words, under the Constitution Act and the Canada Health Act, healthcare delivery is a provincial responsibility, full stop. Full stop. It's achieved through numerous statutes that we have in Alberta, just like other provinces, whether it's the Emergency Health Services Act, Government Hospitals Act, and so on. There's a bunch of pieces of legislation. But be clear in your minds, the law is clear, the policy is clear, that timely access to tertiary care, specialized care you can only get in Edmonton, is a provincial issue, and the Alberta government's responsible for it. This whole relocation thing is not a city issue. It's a provincial issue. And what's really puzzling about this, did any of you get the robocall from the Premier last week that you can recall? Anyway, she phoned 200,000 phones in the north, and she also issued a video. And one of the first things she says in the video is that the Edmonton is closing the city center airport on March 15th. That's this Friday. Absolutely false. Not true. The charter companies are still operating. The tower's still there. The lights are still on. The RCMP continue to operate and will. The Edmonton City Police. And Medevac, private charter Medevacs will still land there. But the provincial government made the decision to relocate the planes out to the international airport, and that's where they're going to go. When the decision was made by the City of Edmonton to close the airport, and we take no issue of that. We're not here about the airport. The doctors are concerned about healthcare. They don't care about airports. They care about patients. The Alberta government said that that they would not stop the Medevacs from landing at the city center airport until all of you and all Albertans were guaranteed the same timely access to tertiary care that you have now. Okay? In other words, don't worry, we're not going to put anybody at risk here. We're going to make sure that whatever is in place after is the same as now in terms of timeliness. So if anybody thinks that 40 minutes, which you have now, going to an hour and 15 is the same, please let me know, okay? Because, come on. There's some communities, Lac La Biche just about triples its time. Dr. Burkle, who you'll hear on the radio, because we've got an ad running, he's the medical director for that area. He's got responsibility for 200 kilometers of Highway 63 and 881. He deals with that carnage in his emergency room. He said in one shift alone, he sent out 5 code reds, 5 criticals. Okay? So you can imagine. And his time goes from, I think it's, I've got it right here, 38 minutes to an hour and 24. Now, the province promised that they would not stop the Medevac planes from landing until such time as equal timely access is provided. And one of the complaints the doctors have and others have right now is that promise is not being honored because the government is forcing the planes out on Friday, even though all the other planes will keep landing and taking off. Here's the document from the City of Edmonton, their latest report. It says the city has been advised by the province that it would be able to facilitate the relocation of Medevac and their own operations within 1 year of receiving notice. The city has not provided notice to date. The city has not set a date for closure. The plan, there's one runway that's open and been operating for over 2 years. The other runway was taken out a long time ago as part of a racetrack and stuff, right? The plan that the city has is to redevelop the land over a 25 to 35 year time frame. 25 to 35 year time frame, okay? And in fact, most of the development they want to do initially is on the east side of the airport that has nothing to do with the existing runway and operations. One of the first things they want to do is expand the LRT, and they're not going to do it until after they finish the South LRT, which is not expected to be finished till 2019. They want to do another one. So everything the city wants to do is way off in the future. Just to fast forward a minute, what the doctors are saying is, could we have a timeout here? And you'll see in a minute that there's so many gaps in this system that they're putting in that are going to result in people dying, full stop. So can we just take a timeout? The airport's still open. Can we sit down and have a discussion, identify the gaps, and try and find some logical way to solve them so somebody doesn't have to die that didn't need to die? And what we're saying is, the city's not telling you to get out. In fact, you could leave the runway operating for 5, 10, 15 years while the population growth of the north continues to go up to the point where we've got enough demand for another tertiary care facility, and we build that tertiary care facility where you guys can get to it, and then to tear out the runway. Like, why are we doing this? Why is this being rushed? Especially when we're dealing about saving lives and lives of children. Here's the runway that's operational. This is the side that they want to move NATE and the LRT onto. This is a mile of pavement, just about 5,870 feet. There's the Medevac base. This is your emergency access to life-saving care when you or your loved ones are critically injured or really sick. What we're saying is, let the city go ahead with its development, leave the one runway open, keep using the base, have that access to the Royal Alec, and then once the city's ready to develop this part, we'll have another tertiary care, nobody has to die. Is that ever unreasonable, isn't it? Being sarcastic. You would think it is with the criticisms we're getting from the government. So what we've said is there's some solutions here. And the solutions are, first, suspend the March 15th relocation decision. And just so you're clear, the government does not have to pass a law to change the decision. They don't have to enact a regulation. The government said to Alberta Health Services, on March 15th, you will relocate the planes. Tomorrow morning, the Premier and the Minister of Health can say to Alberta Health Services, on March 15th, it will be business as usual. That's it. That's all they have to do. Now you have to put it in writing if they don't want to. You follow me? There's no big legal complex thing here where they're going to have to go to the Prime Minister and amend the Constitution. We'll have to have a Charlottetown Accord. I mean, come on. Let the Medevac planes keep landing. Long-term solution, build new tertiary care either right at the end of the airport in Leduc, where you guys can get to it quickly, or somewhere in the north where you can get to it quickly, whether it's Fort McMurray or somewhere else with the population growth. But there's another solution if push comes to shove. if the province goes to the city, which it's odd here because the city's not saying you can't land, it's the province forcing the planes out. But assume the city said, oh, no, no, you can't land. Well, the province could expropriate that runway. They could expropriate that runway in the same way that they expropriated property to twin Highway 16, to twin the Yellowhead. Okay? And it's funny because the province goes and the mayor's going, Mayor Mandel says, this land's not for sale. The city's the owner of the land. Well, as some of you know, I tend to represented lots of landowner expropriation cases in my career. And every one of my clients has always said when they come along and want the guy's land for the, most of them say, or not, I should say some will say, sure, let's work it out. But others say, no, no, I don't want it here. I want to keep my land when they're approached for an expropriation for a new interchange or a highway. And let me put it this way. They're in the process of twinning Highway 63, finally, right? We've all heard about that. Imagine a group of landowners along there was planning on building houses on their land, just like the city wants to build on the airport lands, houses. And Alberta Transportation came along and said, we want to put some houses here, or we want to take your land for twinning of the highway, Highway 63. And the landowner said, oh, no, no, this land's not for sale. We plan on putting houses there. Would Alberta Transportation guy drive back to the Edmonton and goes, well, looks like we're not twinning Highway 63. It's a good idea, not going to work out. They'd say, why? Oh, the landowner said it's not for sale and they don't want it. It's not how expropriation works. You follow me? It's when there's a use for land, for private land, that's identified for a higher order purpose, a highway, an interchange, a hospital, emergency access to a hospital. The law allows the government to expropriate that property, provided that that person is fully and fairly compensated. Okay? Fully and fairly compensated. So another option the government has is to say to the city of Edmonton, we're going to expropriate this runway, this Medevac runway and the hangar area, for as long as we need it, next 5, 10, 15 years, until such time as we have enough tertiary care. And then if you wanted to, we'll give the land back to you, and if you want to build your houses at that time, you can. So there's another solution. Now, some people say, oh, well, boy, expropriation, that's a little aggressive. Well, I did some research, and a large portion of the airport lands back in 1939 were owned by 2 private owners who wanted to build housing developments on them. History's kind of repeating itself right now because the city wants to build housing developments on this land. And the city used its expropriation powers and expropriated the land from those owners who wanted to build houses for the purpose of running an airport there. So this idea of the province stepping in to expropriate the runway to keep the medevacs going is hardly novel. It would merely be history repeating itself. And there's the expropriation order. So here's the runway again. There's the Royal Alec Hospital. In the area in red, that's the emergency bay. Right here is 102nd Street. That street is also owned by the City of Edmonton. The roads out here are owned by Lloydminster. When you get out into the municipality, the roads are owned by municipalities. So at law in Canada, roadways are owned by municipalities. So the city owns this road. The city owns the land underneath the runway. What if Mayor Mandel, for some crazy reason, said, I'm going to close this road because I want to build luxury condos on it? Could you imagine how everybody would react? The ambulances can't get into the ambulance bay there. See them all? For those who can't see it, there's 3 ambulances sitting right there going into the bay. The ambulance service, the fire department say, this is crazy. We're going to have to pull up here, go up these stairs. It's going to take us another 4 minutes to get our patients into that emergency area. You can't do this. You can't block our access and Edmontonians' access to emergency care. That's wrong. It'd be a hue and cry, right? Well, I got a question for you. What's the difference between this, the runway, that's owned by the City of Edmonton, that they're trying to close, and that, the roadway to the Royal Alec I'll tell you, nothing. Nothing. They're both pieces of pavement that are used to save lives. And in the same way that the city or the government would not sit back and let the city close the access to the Royal Alec for Edmontonians, I'll suggest to you the government should be stepping in and preventing you losing your access to emergency care by losing access to that runway, that Medevac runway. Here's what they want to build there, an agri-hood. There is a little bit of agricultural land in the province. We're not Dubai. We're not even the lower mainland of British Columbia. I think we'll be okay. We will not starve if we lose some vegetable gardens that they want to build in there. They can build them after they clean up the environmental contamination. Here's what it looks like. The population they want to put in this 500 acres is 30,000 people. 30,000 people in 500 acres. That's their plan. But that's their plan. All we're saying is go ahead with your plan, do it in a phase, let the people of the north, let the people of the rural areas live by having access to those healthcare systems. You'll hear the government say and the premier say, don't worry, STARS will save you. STARS wishes it could. I thought everybody got Medevac by STARS. And the doctors explained to me, first of all, that STARS flies. This is their new helicopter. It's not in service yet, but most of their helicopters are all these BK-117s. They fly at about 212 kilometers an hour. The King Air, the fixed-wing air ambulance, fly at 500 kilometers an hour. If your child's just been run over by a car and needs to get to the trauma suite as fast as possible, which way do you want them to go? Do you want them to go 500 miles an hour or 212 miles an hour? Okay. STARS is much slower, has limited range, has limited weight capabilities, and so on. There's not a lot of room in those helicopters. So we're always, what the doctors tell me and the emergency guys is we're always going to have fixed wing because the helicopters just can't fly in the bad weather conditions, can't fly in icing conditions. They don't have the range, they don't have the speed. Close in, STARS makes a ton of sense. But when you get to the distances that we're talking about that need to be covered for Alberta, STARS is not the best option for lots of transfers. So what the Premier said in her address is that don't worry if there's a critical patient that comes in and goes to the international airport at Leduc, STARS will take that patient and fly them to the rooftop of either the ALEC or the U of A. Okay? Okay. Well, what if STARS is already responded to a accident on the Yellowhead at Vegreville and your patient arrives? Then what happens? Well, that patient gets stuck in a ground ambulance and goes all the way up the most congested stretch of highway in Alberta through the city to the Royal Alec. Okay? That's what the doctors are saying. The other thing is, you know, sometimes people, I used an example at my last meeting about my teenage son, and unfortunately he's here tonight, so maybe I shouldn't do that, but I'll do it anyway. Hayden, this is a pure hypothetical. You've never done what I'm about to suggest. Imagine your teenagers came to you and they're planning a camping trip and it's their first one. And you just start to ask some basic questions. And every question comes back as a fail. Like they haven't thought of a tent. You know, they didn't think about bringing a big water jug. They not have an axe, right? So you look at their plan and you can see that this obviously isn't going to work. Well, let's try that with this STARS answer that the Premier keeps talking about. So we know that, here's the following facts that are not in dispute. STARS cannot fly in a snowstorm. Okay? We get snowstorms in Alberta in winter. Okay? Medevacs, people get in car accidents during snowstorms. There is no medical phenomena that prevents people from having heart attacks or strokes during snowstorms. The fixed wing can fly during snowstorms. A fixed wing is going to land at the international airport with a critical code red in the back during a snowstorm. That is totally predictable. It's a certainty. How does STARS help at that point, no matter how badly they want to help? They can't. Pause. Where will that ground ambulance then enter? The busiest, most congested stretch of highway in Alberta. Has anybody driven that stretch of highway when it's icy or there's a snowstorm? My kids play let's count the cars in the ditch, right? So this is as obvious as saying fine to the kids going off camping with nothing. It is absolutely obvious that there's huge gaps in this plan. And that's what the doctors are so concerned about. Huge gaps. And it's not STARS' fault. STARS would love to be there. In fact, STARS has said, he said it's too early to know if STARS will be able to fill the role that Alberta Health is envisioning. He's being polite. And keep in mind, the government, the Premier said, oh, there's only 5 critical patients a month. And one of the paramedics just really wrinkled her forehead at me like, did you just say 5 a month? Yes, I did. I take it she has seen more than that herself. The doctors say, that's crazy. That doesn't make any sense from what they see. Dr. O'Connor, when he sees in the emergency room in Fort McMurray, what Dr. Burkill sees at Lac La Biche, and what the other Dr. Ibbotson and McGowan and other doctors see in Grand Prairie and elsewhere. Dr. Ibbotson, by the way, who's been very vocal on this issue, is the medical director, or sorry, he's the trauma director for all of the hospitals in northwestern Alberta. And he's been exceptionally vocal about his concerns about this change and its impact on people's survivability. So the only study, there was some bureaucrat in Alberta Health did some statistical manipulated chart review retrospective and didn't look at kids, didn't look at preemies and other things, and said, yeah, it's probably only going to be 5 a month. Well, even if it is 5 a month, really? We're going to put a medical emergency response system in that we know is likely to fail for 5 patients a month, resulting in death? Is this Alberta? So, but what the doctors are saying is that's nuts. The number's closer to 5 a day, not 5 a month. Some of the paramedics just nodded, and for the record, I won't mention any of their names. So he goes on to say, the STARS spokesman, he says, how are we going to manage the attritional gulls going forward? Because he points out they don't have a helicopter on base all the time. It's out on call. Sometimes it can't fly. There's 1 helicopter, 1 crew. He says right now we don't know exactly how many of those patients we're going to be requested to move. So part of it will be let's see and wait and see how this works out once the patients start coming in. Dying child in the back of an airplane. And the mom finds out when she asks, well, how's he going to be transported? The answer is, well, we're really not sure. We're just kind of playing this by ear. We'll see how it works out. Are you kidding me? That's what's about to happen on March 15th. This is real. Now you see why the doctors took out the full-page ad and 90 have signed their name to this letter? This is real. This is very serious. So I mentioned about there's that little stretch of highway. I went to pick up one of my other kids from the airport just before Christmas, and we pulled out on the highway, and it was stop, 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 go, mostly stop. Look at how close the vehicles are. Look at that. Oh, there's an ambulance. Now, he wasn't lights and sirens on. There actually was one, and I watched him fight his way up the shoulder and half sliding off and trying to get back on, and he couldn't go that fast. But, talk about, you say to yourself, who designed this idea? It's just so obvious. You're creating this huge distance. You're putting it, you're putting the patients, you're delivering to the patients on the opposite side of the most congested stretch of highway. Your backup plan is to use a system that says, we're going to have to see how it works. We don't know if we can do it, being stars. When we know they're going to be on their own calls. It's the busiest base in Western Canada. Some of you might know the Edmonton Stars base. So just a couple other points and I'll finish up. The Health Quality Council said that made 18 recommendations. And they said if you implement, they said these recommendations should only be implemented if and only if we can no longer land at the City Centre Airport. So they didn't say, let's move out to the International, it'll be great. They said, if all else fails, and we can't land at this city centre anymore and land people beside the hospital, the Royal Alec, and it's no coincidence the Royal Alec's beside the landing strip and vice versa, it's by design, that here's some things we can do to mitigate the risk. And they had 18 recommendations. One of them is to build a dedicated overpass so that the ambulance can come right from the hangar onto the northbound lane of Highway 2 at Nisku there. And a dedicated ambulance lane so they can fight their way up through that traffic. Synchronize the lights and put the control thing that some ambulances have where you can turn the lights, traffic lights, into all the ambulances so you can fight your way up through White Avenue and Gateway Boulevard and then through downtown and over the Walterdale Bridge and then back up through downtown and then to the Royal Alec or over down White Ave over to the U of A. And they also said that the equipment on the the fixed wing and stars and ground ambulance should be standardized, because you guys know that if you got a critical patient who's on different fluids and you got to switch pumps and mix up new stuff and redo IVs and take all that monitoring equipment on and put new monitoring equipment on, that can be 20, 30 minutes right there. So right now they don't have that problem because you come off your fixed wing into your dedicated ambulance, same crew takes you right in the door to the waiting trauma room. So they said, the Health Quality Council said, you've got to standardize all this stuff. And you got to, if your alternate airport has to be operational, all these things. There's no overpass been built. It's not even under construction. There's no dedicated ambulance lane. There's been no synchronization of lights. There's been no standardization of pumps. The Villeneuve Airport has not been extended and set up for the alternate. And on her video, the Premier said that the Health Quality Council made 18 recommendations and her government has acted on every single one of them. Absolutely not true. Full stop. She also said we consulted with the doctors and communities and we listened to their concerns and addressed their concerns. Not true. That's what the doctors have been complaining about as well. There was no consultation. The reason that we're in this situation is partly obviously something's gone terribly off the rails internally in government, as between Alberta Health Services and within government. But we're also in this situation because the government currently lacks the political will to do the right thing, which is to find a better solution than what they've come up with. And what we're urging people to do, and thousands of people across Alberta are doing it right now, is to contact their MLAs, to contact the city MLAs, and express their concerns about this. I should just add one other thing. The government on Wednesday is, I guess they've been phoning into the communities and asking, hand-picking a local municipal councillor and asking that councillor to take a local reporter. The government plane will come in on Wednesday morning and they're going to fly them all down Wednesday morning to see the new holding center, okay? The 6-bed holding center. What you guys need to be totally clear about in your minds is that it's a really nice, and the Premier talks about how pretty it is and it's warm and all this stuff. If you're having a massive heart attack, you don't want to be, oh, isn't this lovely? Oh, can I stay here for half an hour? Do you guys have color TV? I mean, come on. Where do you want to be? The cath lab. Now. I'm dying. So she says, oh, but everybody's going to go to this nice new facility. It's beautiful. It's pretty. Watch her video. You should see the hate mail she got from people after she said that. It's the, you know, the reason she said, and this facility doesn't currently exist at City Center. Of course it doesn't, because the whole idea is to get you off the plane, in the ambulance, into the hospital, because it's an emergency, right? Maybe you guys should build that here. A nice little, I don't even know where the hospital is in town, but halfway between the edge of town and the hospital, build a nice little holding center. And then when somebody's dying and you can say, you're taking me to the hospital, you're taking me to the hospital, right? Oh, no, we're taking you to a beautiful new 6-bed holding center. And it's got color TV, right? This is ridiculous. They think it's such a good idea. They're going to use the government planes to fly in all these guys from across the province to show it off. So if somebody goes in there with a heart attack, despite no matter how well trained those paramedics are, they cannot do what is needed in the cath lab. No matter how skilled the paramedics are, they cannot do the trauma work that can only be done in the trauma room, or stop the internal bleeding from that mother giving birth, or deal, you guys get it. I mean, all the different things that, the reason you're being transported by fixed-wing air medevac into that airport is because the local hospital didn't have the equipment to save you. So how is taking you into this first aid station with nice color TVs and nice paint going to help you? It's not. So please don't be fooled by this first aid station that they're going to roll out to great fanfare on Wednesday and tell everybody how great it is. So what we're encouraging people to do, we've been into 10 different communities across the north. We have a Facebook page that has we have phenomenal amount of traffic on our Facebook page. One of our posts yesterday had 23,000 views. We've got a website. People are becoming informed. The emails are going to the politicians. We're running radio ads. But we need each of you to help inform others and help them get the message to the government that there is a better way, that we don't need someone to die to prove the point. We don't need a child to die to prove the point. The government can take a cooling off here. Clearly, and I don't think for a minute, and I honestly believe this, I don't think the Premier was lying. I think she was told. She probably said, are these 18 recommendations implemented? And somebody probably said, yes, Madam Premier. Right? And she probably said, are you sure? And they said, yes, we're sure. And so she said it. Clearly, she's been given a lot of really bad advice, because the airport isn't closing on the 15th. This nice, warm triage first aid station won't save any lives. Follow me? So we need to put the pressure on to get the government to pause and rethink this, sit down with the affected communities, the doctors, and find a better way. There's lots of better ways, but this one isn't it. To help people do that, on our website, there is a right on the homepage, there's a button there you can click on to help you send an email. There's other things you can do, write letters to the editor, stay up to date on Facebook, and I'm going to now turn the microphone over to former Minister of Health from Northwest Territories, Bruce McLaughlin.
Yeah, thanks, Keith. First of all, I'd like to say thank the doctor and Keith for having me along. This is about my third meeting now, and I'd like to really, pay some tribute to them, because they've been doing this twice a week, away from their busy law firm, away from their busy medical practice, to do this on their own time, with no great rewards except heaps of criticism from bureaucrats. For me, I was born and raised and educated in Edmonton, and worked in a small mining town, the Northwest Territories, after I finished university, and then in Yellowknife since then. And so I'm pretty familiar with things. And when I first heard they were closing the city center airport, I thought, well, that's pretty for big flights for 737. That's pretty stupid, you know. But if Edmonton wants to turn themselves from the gateway to the north to a bypass to Calgary, that's kind of their problem. But then they started talking about actually closing the airport for everything, including medevacs. I started hearing things like the city started holding public hearings, and they were saying they're bouncing around about, there's about 500 flights a year. Well, we had the person from Yellowknife who organizes the medevac flights out of Yellowknife, and she said, you guys must have your figures wrong, because I do 500 medevac flights a year just from Yellowknife, you know. So there's been misinformation and stupidity from day one on this issue. And the next thing that really got me was there was 2 runways, and the mayor says we're going to phase in this closure. So what runway does he close? He closes the runway that has the instrumentation on it, so planes can land and take off in bad weather. And I've heard a couple of stories from, like, in Yellowknife, a personal friend of mine owns his own medevac service. He has a contract with the government, and he told me one patient ended up sitting on a bad weather day. They had to go to the international airport, sat on the pilot's lounge at the international airport for 2 hours before an ambulance finally came to get him, because he had nowhere else to put him. And there was another case where there was a neonatal group from the Royal Alec Hospital. It was bad weather. They sat on the runway for 3 or 4 hours waiting to take off to go to, I think it was Grand Prairie, and the child died while they were sitting on the airport. So things are already kind of going wrong, and the big one hasn't happened yet. And this other thing, I'd like a little story. We were in St. Paul about 10 days ago, and it was a Tuesday night, and the city was putting on their big town hall phone meeting over the air about how good everything was going to be when they did this, and they were talking about the 60 patients per year. Well, I mean, if you're sending patients out on a scheduled basis, you wouldn't be doing it basically after 5 o'clock. You wouldn't be doing it on a weekend. So we land in St. Paul about 6:30, and we're waiting in the little terminal we have there. And the ground ambulance runs in to the airport, and an air ambulance lands to pick up the patient. You know, so we were joking, well, there's one of those 60 patients per year. What a coincidence. And then we're at the meeting we're having, and about 2 hours into the meeting, the town councillor gets a phone call from one of the local employees or somebody he knows, saying another ground ambulance or another air ambulance just had to come and pick a patient. So, boy, there's 2 out of the 60 a year just happened. You know, so these people have been putting out misinformation from day one, and they're still doing it even now. And now what they're doing is the worst thing. They're moving people to the international airport when they don't have to. The RCMP still don't have a hangar to move to till next year. The city police are still using it. The flying club's still operating. The flying school's still operating. You know, the company that provides gas and a hangar area and a waiting room for people going on charters, they're still operating. So there's no need to do this immediately. And the other thing is this triage building, it's in the way of what is right now a seamless system. And I didn't know a lot of these things. Even as health minister, I didn't know some of this. Right now, when a plane lands at the city center airport, gets to the end of the runway, takes a couple of minutes for it to taxi over to where the ground ambulance is waiting. And the paramedics who are on the plane get in the ambulance, go to the hospital with the patient, and they directly turn that patient over to the doctor. So they're able to tell that doctor directly, having done it themselves, the condition of that patient, everything that's happened to that patient. Now what they're going to do, they're going to land at the international airport, take 12 minutes to taxi up to the triage building, and then remember this, when a person has a heart attack and you get to the emergency room, whether their family takes them there or paramedic crew takes them there. They get triaged by a nurse. Well, now they're going to be triaged by a nurse again. That's going to take another 10 minutes probably, even if things are working good, and they're going to decide where they're going to go, whether they're going to go on the stars, or they're going to go on a ground ambulance, and there might be a queue for who's most important to get on the next ambulance. And I pity that poor nurse in charge of that facility having to make these decisions when already a doctor in Lloydminster or Yellowknife has already talked to the doctor who's on duty or on call in Edmonton. Literally on a weekend, some specialist is giving up whatever he's doing, golfing or being with his family, whatever, head to the hospital because he knows there's a flight coming in. So they're literally waiting for the patient to arrive to do a medical procedure to save that person's life, which they can't do in their home community. So why are they going to send people into a triage center to figure out what to do with them? So it's beyond common sense for sure. And my experience too, as a health minister and an MLA, I was trying to get dollars for a little glorified nursing station in my mining town. And then later, as a minister of health, trying to get a big new hospital, which I got, but I didn't get it with all of the different things that we wanted, more specialists, more labs, things like that, because they just basically say, you don't have a big enough catchment area, your population's too small, but you have access to these world-class medical facilities in Edmonton, and they are, and we're very lucky as Albertans to have those things. Royal Alec and the U of A with its tertiary care facilities, emergency rooms. We've got the Stollery Children's Hospital, one of the best in the country, and we've got the Mazankowski Heart Center. My stepfather passed away recently, and my mother and I were going there 2 or 3 times a day for about 4.5 months. And I actually met patients in the elevator one day, or parents of patients of a child that they had to move their child from Toronto to Edmonton in order to get what had to be done. And so there's no doubt we've got access to these facilities, and it's great for all of us, Northwest Territories and Northern Alberta, to have these facilities. But the thing is, right now we've got good access to them. Now they're taking us from the Canada's best service, ground ambulance to tertiary care, to the worst in the country for no reason, because the airport's not closing. And basically, ECCA, the City Centre Airport, is our pipeline to these services. We pay taxes provincially, federally. Those two governments are putting money in these facilities in Edmonton. And now what they're doing is your local airport here, that's your lifeline, to this service. And what they're doing is they're, blocking off the other end. They're just taking the other end of the pipe away. So it's just beyond understanding. And a couple of things I'd like to touch on here is, basically Alberta voters are the key. People in Northwest Territories, we can complain about this, but we don't count because we don't vote for the politicians down here. So that's why it's up to people like you to go to our website and push the necessary buttons and make the necessary phone calls. If you happen to know your MLA by first name or casual acquaintance, it's worth talking to them and let them know your concerns. And the other thing I've heard quite a bit about from some people, I try to talk to everybody I can about it because I'm in Edmonton right now because I've got an old mother that doesn't want to leave her house. So, I see people, local bars, restaurants who I know from when I lived in Edmonton, and I talk to them about this, and they kind of get glazed over about explain it, and they said, why did you leave it so late? Well, the reason is 6 months ago, the provincial government and the city was still saying, we're not going to cut this off until everything's okay, until we've got a really good system. And you know what? That system's not there. So that's why doctors like Dr. Paluski and all these other doctors, and these aren't just any doctors. They're doctors involved in trauma care, in the emergency rooms, both in Edmonton and in all these communities, they're the ones who are upset about this. And they're not upset. I mean, doctors don't like to go, they've got better things to do than stand around in public forums. And so basically, that's why I'm involved, because I know some of these doctors and I know what the situation is. So basically, anyone in Edmonton, anyone here, but you got relatives in Edmonton, tell them to phone their MLA and get them on the phone, because politicians react to voters, and that's the main thing. And I was a politician. I know politicians react to voters.
We'll open the floor to anybody who has any questions or comments that they'd like to make. I think we have a number of people that are currently viewing this presentation live as well. So just so that you're aware, this is in the public domain right now. So I don't know if you want to take that under advisement. Certainly. There's a microphone right here in the middle. I don't know.
I'm going to stand up for our small congregation.
I'm just worried that other people there are over 100 people that are actually listening as well. So, I mean, for their benefit, it would serve us very well if you could.
My name is Benjamin. I'm also an employee of Lloydminster's Emergency Care Services, and this closure it's no longer a warning so much as it's happening this week. How is your message going to change? How is your activities going to change in letting everybody know that people are going to start dying next week?
We've been on this information tour for quite some time now, and I think that we are seeing some effect in that the government messaging has changed over the weeks, and it wasn't until just recently that they've elected to actually coincide their move, their provincial aircraft fleet out to the international. Prior to that, they were going to continue using the city centre airport, but I think they've recognized that the optics are very bad, that politicians' convenience trumps health. So there have been some changes, so I don't think any of us should be entirely disheartened by the fact that they have not announced yet. We will all celebrate together once they do suspend that decision, and it has not been dug up. Even if the 15th comes and goes, bulldozers have not been placed on the approach path to those lands. So there is no immediate concern that the actual infrastructure will be gone. I don't know if it'll take a death on that highway coming in from the international to Edmonton that is going to make them change their mind, or if they will do that in advance. We certainly do not want to see a single patient suffer.
I got a quick question, more of a legal question. I've just been an aviator myself. What is the repercussions legally if a captain decides, you know what, I'm not going to land at the international, I don't care what Alberta Health Services says, and I'm going to make the decision to go land at the city centre airport. They just say, tell the hospital I have an ambulance there for me. It could put their career and their jobs at jeopardy, but what is your feelings from the captains and the co-pilots saying, we're going to be landing there, I don't care what the international says, the city centre is going to save my patient, because I wouldn't want that on my conscience.
No, I think that's a point well taken. I can't answer the legal aspect of it, but I certainly do know that as the providers, the people that are in the trenches, you are being placed in an untenable position. And I feel for you. And if I can help with any post-traumatic stress counseling, I certainly will make my services available. But that's not who you want to talk to first. So
it's really sad that we're having to talk about this, and I know you know that. The government did bring in some somewhat watered down whistleblower legislation, and perhaps the captain would be taking actions in accordance with that legislation. We've talked about this actually as to what's going to happen. I mean, if that crew, the paramedics are saying, whatever code language, if the guy's conscious or you use, or if he's not, this patient's not going to make 20 minutes. And the pilots go, we could have him in the Royal Alec in 6. And they can see the runway lights on. Are they going to fly all the way out? I would hope that if they made that decision, they wouldn't be disciplined. If they were, I would offer to represent them for free.
Okay, well, that's...
And the other thing I should tell you all is that one of the things that the board's asked me to do, the board of directors of the Sabre Medevac, is to make forms available, legal forms, that frontline emergency personnel, the doctors, the paramedics, the EMTs, the nurses, can use with, I hate to even say this, but with the next of kin, so that if it's clear that the death was a result of a delay, and it always won't be, we know that, but if it is absolutely clear, but the paramedics aren't allowed to say anything because of the patient privacy laws and the doctors can't say anything, they can be released from that restriction. So we're going to make the forms available to parents and to next of kin if they feel they've suffered the wrong end of this decision in their family, that at least it will come out. We don't want to go there, but it looks like we are if the government doesn't back down in the next few days. And hopefully, if once the government realizes that there are these huge gaps and people are dying, that they'll immediately stop. The Premier did say that she committed that if there are problems, she would revisit the system. And that's great when you're talking like about a curriculum change in grade 6 social science. But if my child, if I get in a car accident out here on the highway and we get medevaced in and my son dies beside me in the ground ambulance going up Highway 2, there's no way for the Premier to bring my son back. So I think it's grossly irresponsible for the government to be doing this. Thank you.
You're welcome. And something, a little bit of an anecdote, and especially for EMTs here, I spend good portion of my life at the airport. There's a case where I'm just banging around at the airport with a student, and worst thing I usually hear when I change my plans is such medevac, and they're ready to leave. I usually give them a wide berth, whatever, 2 minutes, no hair off my back. We land 2 minutes late, quote unquote. But the medevac, he didn't even have to say this. He said, "No, thanks, guys." And we needed those 2 minutes. I mean, 2 minutes is not a big deal when it comes to what I need to do. But if I had a captain of that aircraft saying, I needed those 2 minutes, having that aircraft go to the international is absolutely outrageous. And I think we need this city center open, and we need to speak more loudly and get to our MLAs.
Turn up the volume. Good work.
It's a good thing you guys came around. We as a general public sit out here in rural Alberta uninformed regarding scenarios that you presented here today. Somebody talked about the IFR taxiway that's been shut down in the city. What difference has that made with respect to the runway that exists there presently? I got several questions, and if you want, you can just put them all together and come up with an answer at the end. The other question I've got is that the expropriation of the city airport land with respect to the runway and the trauma facilities along with it, I wish somebody would not only, I mean, it's a very relevant issue, but the minute that airport shuts down, somebody is so nearsighted in the fact that they have a facility that they're going to lose because of housing. And I understand this annexation that went on in Northeast Edmonton was done in '82, and nothing has transpired on that land. Like, where does the stupidity start and stop in this province? Like, you lose that runway, 2 generations from now, the people are going to come up here and say, did we not have a facility that everybody in northern Alberta could have utilized as a charter service or whatever? but it's gone. And once it's gone forever. And I think if there was a need to expropriate part of an airport facility for Medevac service and this trauma facility, that should be incorporated into this takeover. If Edmonton wants to develop part of the land, then go ahead and do it. But this is the stuff that we sit here, know very little bit about, till the informed come and tell us about it. And I wish this would have hit the news waves long time before the last election, to be honest with you. I'm not going to say who I support and who I don't support, but I don't support stupidity. And it's my tax dollars that send those people to govern and enable us to be a better province. And I don't see it happening, not under the presentation we got here tonight.
There's been a big disconnect, there's no doubt. And it started with the choice of that particular runway. It was 1634. Why they chose that one, I don't know. If their plans to redevelop the airport lands involved the east portion of the airport lands first, and so that was the one that they chose. Some of us believe that maybe it was just to spite us, to take away that precision runway. It's called an instrument landing system, and that's the one that 1634 had. The one that we currently have with 1230 is not nearly as good as what we had.
I'm not going to question this or nothing. I wish you guys could have brought the Mayor Mandel on these road trips. I'm serious, because he's giving rural Alberta, and I'm talking from Lloydminster to Jasper, a kick in the backside. And if that's what yet he doesn't object to rural Alberta going spending money there, because a fair amount of it does end up there.
Mandel wanted to use those lands for his legacy, but it's our provincial government who has the ultimate control over health policy, and that's who we have to focus our efforts on right now.
Sir, I'd like to start by thanking all three of you fellows for taking the time to be here. I have to say I'm embarrassed for our community that we have so few people here to listen to you, but nevertheless, we do appreciate you coming. I've never been one of these, I've known Keith for more than half my life, and I've never been one of these people that believed in going to the legislature and protesting on the steps. But if you remember in the spring on, was it the Education Act, and the homeschoolers went there with a couple of thousand people and they got a decision the same day. And so maybe, is that something you've considered or not? I certainly compliment you for what you're doing, but these fellows, quite frankly, seem to be pretty much tone deaf to criticism.
Yeah, a very, very public demonstration of support like that has been contemplated. Bonnyville actually has a group that's going. They're taking a bus, and they said, please let everybody on your Facebook page know, and I think even on our website we've let people know. So we don't have the resources to organize and orchestrate something like that, but we certainly would encourage people to take a stand and to make it very public, because that, you're right, can make a difference.
Thanks.
There's a group in Bonnyville that's organized on their own. We recently found out about it. They're going on Thursday. We're going to put the information up as to what time. I think they're planning on getting to the ledge just before noon, and then going into question period and doing some other things. The other thing that we've done is we started running some radio ads today in Edmonton, and we're broadening them out tomorrow into Lac La Biche and Fort McMurray. We have a campaign going on our website and our Facebook right now. The more donations we get, the more time spots we can buy, and we're positioned to move into this market, into Lloydminster. We've spoken with the ad director, and if we get enough donations, we'll start running it on the radios here. They're very powerful ads. They're by the doctors telling it just like it is, and they're 60 seconds. So that's another way people can help, is by going to our website and clicking on the secure donate button. You can donate by Visa or PayPal, and that money goes into these radio campaigns. We're trying to get the word out, and it's just the government just has such a listening problem. I just had an email sent to me, Bruce McLaughlin was speaking. 2 MLAs in Fort McMurray have just published a letter in the Editor, and they're saying, yeah, we could expropriate the land, but we're not going to because all of the rural municipalities told us they didn't want us to intervene. That is just outright nonsense. The rural municipalities have been fighting to keep that airport open and Medevac services relentlessly. Like, I just don't know where these statements come from. It's just outright fabrication. The other thing that's printed by these 2 government MLAs is that the acquisition costs of the airport would be $2 billion. Well, I had a phone call on Friday from an official from the city of Edmonton who had asked administration to give the current valuation on what it would cost to acquire this area outlined in red. According to the city's own valuation documents, $30 million. Okay? So they're inflating everything. They're coming up with every excuse they can not to do the obvious thing. They don't even maybe have to acquire it. Why can't the premier go over or ask the mayor to come over and say, look, we need to try and help our neighbors. We need to try and help northern Albertans and rural Albertans. In fact, Dr. Burkle points out almost half of the patients he sends out on Medevac are Edmontonians driving to and from Fort McMurray who work up there. This isn't just an us and them thing. It's a right and wrong thing. So why couldn't the premier say, Mr. Mayor, go ahead with your development plan. Go ahead with your plan to close the airport. You're not planning on doing your LRT for another 20 years or more, but you can go ahead with it because it doesn't interfere with the runway, and the runway doesn't interfere with the LRT. Go ahead with your NATE stuff when we can afford it, but just hold off on the housing part for a while. We have thousands of acres in the Northeast that are set aside. It was you who said that, right? Yeah, for the residential. And build any houses there. The old Grease Spa, Army Base, service cul-de-sacs all ready for houses. Waiting. It's not like they have a shortage. So there's a reasonable solution here. If some reasonable discourse could start where we say, okay, let's just slow down, keep the planes landing, let's sit around a table, let's try and work out a way where the city of Edmonton can go ahead with its plans on an orderly phase basis. Northern Albertans don't have to lose their lives needlessly. We can expand our tertiary care as our population is supposed to grow all this exponentially the government's talking about, and everybody wins. What's so bad with that? And for saying that, the government calls me, this doctor, and all the other doctors fearmongers. You know, they resorted to name calling. So we're trying to find a reasonable way forward, but we're running out of time. It's not up to us, it's up to you. And but these radio ads might be an effective last push.
I think there's one thing that hasn't been said yet, or if it has been, it needs underlining. Right now, the government's bought in a new budget, and they're talking about tough times, we have to save money. Well, right now, to operate the ground ambulance system out of the city center airport is around $650,000 a year. It's going to be more than $7 million a year to operate the ground ambulance system out of the international airport. So that's the point right there.
Just $6.5 million a year savings.
Well, that's just it. They talk about cutting savings and cutting costs and stuff, but are they planning to develop a new hospital anywhere in and around Edmonton to accept all this expansion of population growth?
Well, they just decided not to go ahead with the Sherwood Park Hospital.
Oh, that's fantastic. Also, do they have something in their budget for a coroner at this triage center?
It's been brought up before.
Okay, just checking.
Is this not criminal? Is it not illegal? Because it seems to me if we were to go 30 minutes out of our way on the way to the hospital, we could be charged criminally with neglect. How is this different?
So what you're saying is you pick up a patient at his house, he's having a heart attack, and you race to the hospital. and your partner in the back says, "Hey, you feel like a Tim's?" And you go, "Yeah, sure. I hear they got chocolate Danishes back. All right, let's swing in." Yeah, you'd be in a lot of trouble. Absolutely. I can answer the question authoritatively. Here's how it works. If you do something in the course of your responsibility as a paramedic or as a medical doctor, and you are negligent in how you carry that out, driving to Tim's would be negligent because it would be foreseeable that delay would cause harm to the patient. You knew that you were doing that. There's a causal nexus between your action and the harm, and you'd be held liable. However, once you get into overall healthcare delivery, the law changes. Because we have a monopoly system where you get the healthcare that the province provides to you in any given province, the Supreme Court of Canada has ruled in a number of cases, and they've been absolutely clear in their rulings, and that is policy decisions related to healthcare do not attract liability. So if the government made a decision to close the emergency room and any emergency services in Lloydminster and people died, their next of kin would not be able to sue the province. It's a policy decision. Similarly, if the province goes ahead with this decision on the 15th and next week people start dying as the doctors are predicting they will, and yep, as you nod, they will, in your uniform, which I won't give your name, John Smith, for the live feed for the government people watching, that they don't have any liability. And in fact, one of the first things I looked at was if I could find a way that the government was breaching either a common law duty of care like negligence or a fiduciary duty or some statutory duty, we wouldn't have done town halls. I would have gone down to the courthouse and I would have got an injunction against the government. And I would have got it easily. But unfortunately, the law is so clear that we get the health care that the province gives us. The judge would say to me, "Mr. Wilson, your remedy is not in this courtroom. Your remedy is at the ballot box."
You said that, or someone said that charter air ambulances can still land here.
Yep.
What about other government air ambulances?
Well, what initially happened, just to give you some context, was the government fleet. So the government has charters, has contracts with 12 fixed wing providers that provide air ambulances. The government has its own fleet of aircraft. That's the aircraft that the Premier and the ministers fly around in, that they're going to use to fly around on Wednesday to pick up all these VIPs to take them to the unveiling of the first aid station with its color TVs and coloring books and things for people to play with while they're bored and waiting. The government was initially going to keep its own fleet of planes landing and taking off at the city center airport throughout this year and into next year. And we were pointing out at some of our early meetings, so let me get this straight. If your child's dying in the back of a fixed wing air ambulance, they have to go all the way out to Leduc. But if the Premier wants to land at the city center to get to a cocktail reception, conveniently, she can. And that was the reality, that dying patients have to go out to the international, but the Premier was going to be able to land and take off. So when she issued her press release a week ago Tuesday, she announced two things. One thing, the first thing she announced was that she has decided that the government's fleet will be moving on the 15th as well. So they got caught. Bad optics. Premier can land, dying children can't. So they're now going to start flying out of the international as well for their fleet. But if you're down in Mexico and you get run over by a car and the health insurance provider decides that the best thing for you is to be flown back from one of these big Learjet out of the US, or there's even some in Alberta and some here in the city. So they send the Learjet down to pick you up at Cancun, fly you in. You're not landing at the international airport. You're going to land at the city center airport, and you're going to go 4 minutes down the road into the Royal Alec. Private charter medevacs coming in from other provinces or the territories will also be able to still land at the city center, but Albertans won't.
Was your question answered? Anybody?
I'm just glad I have Saskatchewan. Lifeguard out of Saskatchewan, vacant land. Yeah.
That's correct. So if there are no more questions, we could wrap this up this evening. And I'd just like to, again, encourage people to take some information at the back. You need to circulate this to everybody who wasn't here tonight, just to let them know how this could translate into some bad outcomes for people that we work alongside, for our families and our relatives. I think that you're right. It has not been made public to a lot of people. I think it's been suppressed. You certainly wouldn't read about it in the Edmonton Journal, which has continued to censor these issues for years, and this one in particular. So we need to do the jobs of reporters ourselves, and so take it upon yourself. You've all been deputized now, so go out and spread the word, and go to that website, hit that hot button. Take heart. We haven't seen it dug up yet. So remember, whatever you put in today could be the effort that tips the balance. So good luck and stay out of our emergency departments.